Hi everybody, and welcome to the on-demand version of the Remote Config Workshop. My name is Russell Sung, a developer advocate here at Unity, and I'll be going through this demo with you. So let's get started. As you can see, we're already in the Unity project, and let's take a look at what this simple mobile game Lodi Dungeons looks like without any changes yet. So as you can see, you are a dinosaur character with a cute hat, and the objective is to get the key from the chest and get to the top of the level, which will unlock the door and allow you to progress to the next level. So before we go any further, I just want to make sure that your project is linked to the correct services. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, you'll be able to verify that your project is connected to the correct Unity organization with the correct corresponding project ID. We also want to make sure that the package manager has the correct version of remote config and authentication installed. And that will allow you to have this UI under the window remote config that allows you to see some of the settings that we have set up, match the config values on the dashboard, as you can see here. So these ones match in the UI in the Unity editor, and if you go back to the UI in Unity, you'll see that these match exactly. And if I were to change these settings to 2 and this to Spanish, as well as the character size to be bigger, and push those settings from the Unity UI, you will see that the dashboard, and if I reload the page, you'll see that these values have changed accordingly. And then if I go back to Unity now, and I press play, you'll see that the language has changed according to our localization settings. So you can again verify these settings here, and let's see how the rest of the game has changed. So you can see that our character has increased in size, as well as a new hat. So let's take a look at some of the scripts that are behind this behavior. The first one that we will be most interested in would be the apply remote config settings script. And as you can see, we will be requiring the unity.remoteconfig, unity.services.core, and the unity.services.authentication namespaces. We will also be using the system.threading.tasks for the asynchronous methods that we'll be using today. It is going to be an instance script so that it can be accessed from other scripts in the project. And these are the internal variables that correspond to the variables that you saw on the dashboard. These will be your default settings in case your user doesn't have access to Wi-Fi or they lose connection. Therefore, having these will not break your game. We'll have two structures that we send to remote config. The user structure, for example, has a score int, and the application structure, which you could send app versions, for example. The first function we'll be looking at is called the initialize remote config async function, and this is an asynchronous task. And much like a call routine or yield statement, asynchronous methods will pause, waiting for a result, but the difference is that it can return data. And so in order for remote config to work, we will want the unity services.initializeAsync function to be called. And as of remote config 3.0.0, authentication is required for managing the environment information and retrieving the settings from remote config. So in other words, if the authentication service.instance is not signed in, we will call that function to sign in anonymously. We have a simple awake function for setting up the instance. And we have a asynchronous start function because we're going to be calling the await initialize remote config async function. And this will wait for the login of authentication. And we will also be creating a new user attribute struct, which has a custom value score of 10. And that right here is the config manager.fetch config line. This is the primary way that you'll be getting data from the cloud service of remote config by sending the custom user structure and the default app attribute. We also have optional settings that you can consider, such as the user ID for logging in, and you could also set the environment ID. By default, it will be the production one, but if you would like to specify where the string comes from, you can go back to Unity, and you'll see that under the window remote config environment, you'll see that ID matches here. So take note that that does change per project, and you want to make sure that you are targeting the correct environment. And once the config manager.fetch config is completed, we would like to subscribe to this remote config loaded function, which is right here. And it is a subscribe event function that provides some information on what that configuration response was. So you have your default settings where nothing was changed. You have your cached settings where a previous session has already fetched some data. And the one that we are most interested in is when there are new settings available. And so what we've done is we have attached the internal variable of language to the config manager app_config.getString language, which is very specifically this uppercase language. And if you look at the dashboard, it matches the name of that config value exactly. And as for the localization, we have a function that if the start button text is not null, we call this set localization function, passing through that internal variable that we have assigned. And so the set localization is just a very simple if-else if for the purposes of this demo. It checks against the string that we've passed through, and it sets the text accordingly. We also have the rest of the local variables, such as season, active hat, character size, and character speed, and they're all calling the associated config manager.app_config.get in either a string, int, or float. So let's take a look at the dashboard. And you'll find on the Unity Gaming Services tab under the Live Ops, Remote Config, these are the settings. And so you have the active hat, the character size, the character speed, the language, and the season. And if we were to change this here back to English, and the character size back to 1, and the hat back to 1, and make sure that you hit save, you can see that if we go back to the Unity project, go back to the remote config UI, and press pull, those values have updated. And so now it's back to English, and our character size is back to normal. Let's take a look at how to create a campaign on the dashboard. You hit View Campaigns, and you can also find them here at the bottom under Overview. And as you can see, we have already a couple of test campaigns set up, and let's take a look at how to create them. You can also see what keys are impacted by each campaign, and the start date and end date, as well as a priority. And let's hit that create campaign, call it remote config test. And you can see that these are the two states that you can choose. For stateful audiences, Unity has provided some built-in audiences. And let's use recently active players and existing players. You can also take a look at the stateless JEXL versions, which allow you to do contextual data attributes to define your players. You can also target a specific number of your player audience that you want to target. And you can even do an A/B test. So for example, you could have the hat change to the third option, and you can even do it by adding a variant group for A/B testing. For example, changing that to 4. And you can also split them by default evenly or a set specific percentage. You can add a third group, for example, 33%. And you can also have them split evenly. So for now, we won't be doing the A/B testing. We will just have the active hat here be set to the third option. And you can take a look at scheduling a start date as well as a end date and the priority of the campaign by low, medium, or high. So this is in case you have campaigns targeting the same settings. Let's set that to finish. And before you hit enable, you can verify the details of the campaign, the audiences that you would want to be targeting, and the percentage of those players, and exactly what you would be changing. So let's hit enable, hit campaigns, and just verify that it is active. Which one is active and what key is changing. So let's take a look back in the Unity editor, and if we press play, you see that the hat has changed. And so something that I would like to highlight is that the campaign does override the default values here. And so just be aware that any campaigns you have running would be overriding these default values, which is something to note if you're just trying to experiment with the values. And another campaign that I would like to highlight is the user struct test. And as you can see, we are targeting this JEXL condition user.score above 5. And if you look in the code, we are sending the user struct with a score of 10, which means that this player will be targeted by that campaign. And this is just one of the many stateless conditions that allows you to target a contextual data attribute. Another option would be by CPU or RAM. And so we will be making the character speed 10 and the character size double, which will show up very obviously if this campaign does target us. And so you just want to make sure that it is active in the overview and the 2 keys that we're changing. And let's go back to the Unity editor. And as you can see, when we hit play, our character is twice as large and has a much faster movement speed. And so this was just an overview of remote config and a quick demo of some of the use cases, as well as an overview of the dashboard and how to create campaigns. I hope you have enjoyed this short video. You can always catch up with us on our GitHub repo for this for Lodi Dungeons for any of the latest releases and updates. Thanks for watching.